I like being an enigma. I like not being easily figured out. I had to shift from a place of having so much social anxiety. And for me, liberation is getting to a place where it's like, I'm not made for people to consume or understand.
Content warnings for this episode may include dysphoria, mental health, racism, experiences with anti-gay and anti-trans bigotry, and at the root of it all, sexism and misogyny, medical trauma, grief and loss, trauma, miscarriage, and abortion.
Genderful would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and unceded lands that the producers, hosts, and guests live and have dwelt upon. Today we honor the
Coast Salish,
Mohawk, Algonquin, and Anishinabewaki,
Westo, Muskogee, and Cree.
We honor the elders, the human, plant, and animal ancestors of these lands, and celebrate the living descendants of these peoples. May all beings tend these lands for the goodness of the next 7 generations and beyond.
Howdy folks, welcome to Genderful, a talk show interviewing gender diverse people about their special interests. Hi, I'm GenderMeowster, and my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, I'm Miranda, and my pronouns are she, her.
The focus of our show is to interview trans, non-binary, agender, two-spirit, and gender diverse people regarding their special interests, passion projects, and resources for the gender diverse community.
We want our audience to know that we hold multiple diverse identities and bring these lenses to the show with our passion for telling our stories.
I identify as non-binary, transmasculine, polyamorous, ADHD, autistic, and disabled with chronic pain and mobility issues. I also am white and reside in the United States.
I identify as trans feminine, neurodivergent, queer, and a person of color residing in Canada. We invite you to remember that we are whole people with robust lives, friendships, challenges, and successes. We love and are loved, and we are delighted to share these stories with you.
As always, we kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of their identities. Your identities can change over time and are valid every step of the way. And if you think you're gender diverse, you are gender diverse. There's no social or medical prerequisite to be included in the community. Welcome to GenderfulPodcast, a show interviewing gender diverse people about their special interests. This week, our guest, Tiraj Johnson-Garay, he, they pronouns, is chatting with us about mental health care and self-expression. Our guest wrangler, Juice, actually spotted their art on Instagram a while ago and reached out to him. Welcome to Genderful, Tiraj.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
I'm excited that you're here.
Yeah, I'm also excited because artists are like sorcerers to me because it's like it's such a completely different skill set from mine. And I want to be specific about like the type of art. So like visual art, like drawing, painting, that sort of thing. Because we are all artists in some way, and we all choose our different mediums, or sometimes our mediums choose us. But this particular medium is one I do not understand. But I'm trying. I'm trying very hard to learn. So.
Yeah, I love that you use the word sorcerer because I also like label myself as like a creative alchemist because I think all people are innately creative, especially people of color. We definitely know, or just marginalized people, we know how to take nothing and turn it into something. And I think that's an art in and of itself. So,
oh yeah, that's a mood.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, Jack can probably see some of the art in the background there. I made a comment in the green room. It's like, oh yeah, that's a Cubist style, isn't it? I'm like, yes, I'm retaining the information that I've learned.
Spot on.
So we have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests. The first one is, what might be the things you can trace back to your youth that indicated you might be gender diverse one day?
Oh goodness, so many things that I probably didn't like have the vocabulary for, but now looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely was like a little ding that something was going on. I used to do this like thing where it was like one of those like role playing sites where you like it was really common for people to like kind of make their own like original characters like OCs or like kind of so or like edit like anime characters and different things and they made up like these elaborate stories and you would like interact with other people like you would send kind of like a paragraph to someone, they respond back kind of continuing the story and you just kind of go like back and forth, like it was like a very specific kind of like role playing site. I think I was like in middle school. I always role played as a male character, or as it was always kind of like I didn't know the term non-binary, but it was definitely things that were like outside of what you would like stereotype was like, like gender conforming or different things like that. It'd be like very feminine men or like very like masculine women or
Mm,
different things. Um, and then I think just like the type of like characters I read in books and movies, like what I resonated with, I always felt like something was like missing, like with my body, different things like that. Like I remember like my mom telling me that I would like cry to her that I was saying like I had a missing penis and different things like
mm,
that. And like thankfully my family's been always like really supportive, but I made a lot of like comments like that growing up. I think a lot of people think like when it comes to trans men that like we're usually very masculine before we transition, but that wasn't the case for me, at least in my journey. I was very hyper feminine.
mm.
With Puerto Rican culture, like my dad always told me like he would be devastated if I like cut my hair. My hair was like down to my waist, really thick and
Right.
curly. Like in high school, I was wearing like stiletto heels, like very, very hyper femme.
Mm.
But it felt like I was always just disconnected with myself. But it was a very gaslighting experience because people would always compliment how I looked and everything, and just kind of like feeling very consumable to people, but like knowing that this doesn't feel right or like you, but almost like people pleasing with your existence in some ways.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just felt like I was kind of like in drag, is the best way I can put it. I don't know. Like, it was like fun. I love putting on wigs and makeup and doing all that, but I looked at it as an artistic thing versus like an authentic living.
Yeah, like it's very
Yeah.
performative.
Yes, perfect word. Yeah.
And that's not unique to trans masks because speak like I'm gonna speak for all trans femmes for a second here. um, I mean, there are many of us that definitely go through our hyper masculine phases. So I mean, I went through like my ooh, my tough macho dude kind of phase, and like yeah, again, it's all performative,
Yep.
and like you're told at an early age like what role you have to play in society, and like you kind of
Mhm.
just do it, and you don't question it until you start hearing other queer stories, and you start seeing other queer people and seeing other trans people. It's like, oh wait, I don't have to do that.
Yeah. I don't think I really knew I definitely didn't know other trans people or even knew the word until I went to college.
Mhm.
I was like 15, I was born and raised up north, and then I moved down under the Bible Belt. And so, like, even hearing about queer people wasn't like a big thing where I lived. It was a very, very rural area. There was like one instance, like in the gym, where like a guy definitely like made a very like misogynistic, biphobic kind of comment, like I looked
Mm.
like I was bi, and I didn't even know how to process that at like
Oh,
13. What does that mean? Like, obviously, you're
like what
over
does that
social
mean even?
media, right? Like, um, and I identify that way now, but it was like then, like it didn't make sense. We know there was a different intention versus you coming to terms with yourself, kind of thing. But
Mhm.
yeah, very interesting. So late
uh,
20s.
yeah. Now, how would you say your relationship to gender has evolved over time?
I would definitely probably in the like quickest summary. It's just more authentic. It's more me defining it versus like kind of people pleasing tendencies and just conforming to what like
Mm.
society kind of like defines certain terms. I love what you said about like trans femmes. I definitely think even with my identity as like a lesbian before transitioning and like coming out a second time with like my gender, like even with presenting myself in a hyper feminine way, there was still like an overcompensation with being like a kind of like this obsession in the community of like labels of top, bottom, and what that means with like dominance or like submission, all like that kind of stuff that I know innately isn't important to me. It's just I know how I want to express certain things like love or how I want to connect with people and stuff. But like getting into the community and not knowing all these things, you see all these things as normalized. And so you're kind of like, oh,
Mm.
so I have to like be this way, right? Or queerness has to look a certain way, or I have to be polyamorous or monogamous, or all have these certain like views on certain things. And
Mhm.
then you have to like, for me, it was a lot of like taking on all of that and then unpacking of like what actually resonates and what doesn't without
Yeah.
shame too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's good to know that all of these things are out there, but it's up to each person to kind of chart their own course through all these like different ways of existing. And for a lot of us, that's a lifetime journey. Like we never really figure it out. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to invite us to switch topics to the mental health care and self-expression. So we're here to talk about all kinds of pieces, this intersection of mental wellness, the various ways of receiving mental wellness support, perhaps both internally and externally, and the ways that self-expression play a part in all of that. So Tiraj, what inspired you to pursue becoming a social worker and a mental health therapist?
Yeah, so I always knew that I had a deep passion for like helping people. I love people. I love connecting with people. I love listening to people's stories. I'm a first generation college student. My family, I'm the first person in my family to even graduate high school, let alone even go off to college and go to graduate school. So unfortunately for me, I only knew of things of like you become a teacher, a doctor, just kind of like the basic professions, you know. I didn't know that there was like these huge like array of different things. But for me, my family dynamic, there's a lot of enmeshment, codependency that I didn't realize that is a lot more unhealthy now that I'm an adult, that I like cling to and like admired when I was younger for safety reasons and protection. But I had my grandmother, who mostly raised me, tell me a lot of stories when I was younger of how she experienced all types of abuse in the foster care system. And like hearing a lot of that and hearing how like she had a different outcome in life and like a quality of life that was so different than her sister who went through very similar traumas was really intriguing to me of like how do people go through like similar things but like have different like protective factors that make them experience life in such like a different way. And so that definitely inspired me and why I like initially majored in like human development and family sciences because I love just like analyzing human behavior and understanding why people do the whys and everything. And then eventually kind of like transitioning into social work and thinking like, okay, maybe counseling and therapy is what I want to do. Even though I started realizing more recently that I think can't speak for all therapists, of course, but like for me, I think becoming a therapist was a trauma response for me in a way. Being put in a parentified role of like always holding space for other people, that was just natural and what was expected. And so it's like I had to really come to terms with just because you're good at something doesn't make it your purpose, whatever that even means, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And really finding what actually brings me joy and like outside of capitalism and everything like that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, like we all have to eat. So
Yeah, the
yeah,
practicality.
yeah, but it's no, it's that really resonates with me a lot. It's, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should make that your career or your
Yeah.
primary source of income. So um and it's also interesting that you say that becoming a therapist was a trauma response. Because I have a thing that I like to say frequently. It's actually inspired from one of my favorite shows. But I have difficulty with self-care and taking care of myself and taking care of my own needs. And this is probably a maladaptive practice, but I compulsively take care of others when I can't take care of myself.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. And you're definitely not alone in that. That's so
yeah,
common.
oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I definitely get that.
Now tell us some of the ways that you engage in community care with your art.
Yeah, so I feel like with this transition of like leaving the mental health field for so many different reasons too, like it's such a carceral institution. The longer I've been in it, there was more things that I felt like was like in opposition with my integrity and my values. Even though there's awesome people who are in the field doing great work and stuff, it was just a lot for me to have to do. But transitioning to my artwork was a way of like I've spent over 5 years holding space for other people. Like, how do I give myself permission to also like share my story? And in a way
Mm,
that's like not so blunt and allows people to also like resonate through their own like unique personal lens, which is why like my style that you were able to like clock as as cubism, the more like abstract form and everything is because like
mm,
I try to incorporate details of like Afrofuturism, Cubism, and little elements of different things that I like. Like it's definitely not abstract in the sense of like It's just kind of like color splashed, which is also a beautiful form. It's just not my style, but it's still abstract enough where people can put their own like symbolic meaning to it. I'm very intentional with colors and things like that. And so my experience as a mental health provider greatly influences my art, the stories I told right now. Like a lot of art I'm going to be releasing is around grief because that's something that I'm experiencing at the moment. I know a lot of people can. And so being very like vague and allowing like a space for whenever I do post my art for people to talk about what it means to them and things like that. I also use my art in order for community um, fundraising or like mutual aid type of things. Usually, like especially I prioritize on like Black trans femmes and women of color to the forefront. There's a mutual aid that they have. I'll send like a portion of how much money I make to those
Mhm.
kind of like mutual aid funds on Instagram and stuff. Right now, I have a section with two prints that's a art for Palestine right now, and
Mm.
I don't profit a cent off of it, minus the shipping cost, which is like $10. I pay like 10.40 for priority mailing. The prints are 8.5 by 11, and I send 100% of the net profit to PCRF's Gaza Pediatric Mental Health Initiative.
Mm.
Just because my time as a therapist, I specialize in trauma, so that's something that's like really something I'm really passionate about. It kind of is like a pet peeve when I hear people talking about the children over there and using terms like complex PTSD. I don't think there's a post traumatic that is ongoing trauma. That's
Yeah,
not, you know, yeah.
that's
So
very fair points.
yeah,
You know,
so,
the it's you can't really call it post trauma if the trauma is still ongoing.
yeah, for
Yeah.
decades. But yeah,
So there's one topic that's I'm actually really curious to learn more about because
yeah,
this is the first time I've seen this term. But can you explain what social dysphoria is
yeah,
and maybe kind of define that for people who aren't familiar with it?
absolutely. So I think a lot of people in our community, um, probably know examples or experience social dysphoria if they don't know the label. Social dysphoria is essentially just like experiencing any kind of discomfort with like being perceived by others, specifically in a social context. And so this is that intersection of those feelings in the context of like being a trans person and your gender or however you
Hmm.
you know label yourself. So it goes very hand in hand with social anxiety. If you're somebody who has social anxiety, this is something probably you experience too in general, even outside of like the context of gender. But being misgendered or the fear of being misgendered, the fear of like have a lot of feelings about this term, but like passing or not passing, all of that is social dysphoria. Um, Another example could be I was talking to a friend recently. My doctor who prescribes me testosterone really, really wants me to make it a goal to like see a gynecologist by the end of the year. And ironically, like the idea of like going getting like reproductive like care stuff and routine doesn't cause me like I don't have gender dysphoria in terms of anything or my relationship with my genitals, but I do have social dysphoria of the idea of like sitting in a women's health place and like
Mm.
women looking at me probably thinking like why is he here kind of thing because we know that
Yeah.
like there's a lot of exclusion when it comes to like reproductive rights and things like that.
Mm.
um and I think for me, it just gets like really deeper when it comes to like the intersection of like just blackness and race and all of that too.
Yeah, because my follow-up question was going to be, well, how
Yeah,
is this different from gender dysphoria? But I think that last example you provided really kind of elucidates that
yeah.
difference.
I definitely think of gender dysphoria as like the umbrella, and then under gender dysphoria is like the body dysphoria, the social, and then there's even something called mind dysphoria that I don't have too much expertise around. But yeah, so
I'm
this
like
is
vibrating because I'm so excited to share a thing.
yeah,
Oh, please
Um,
do.
have you all heard of the Gender Dysphoria Bible?
no,
Yes.
Okay, so previous Genderful guest was on and talked about this. It's like episode 19, so it was like 2 years ago or something. So I don't expect everyone here has heard it. The episode number might be wrong. Don't come at me if I got it wrong. It's somewhere in the first 25 or so
Yes.
episodes. Um, but the website is genderdysphoria.fyi. I just posted it in the Twitch chat for everyone. Maybe someone can paste it into the resources section for the show notes later. But the table of contents includes a bunch of different flavors of dysphoria. So we'll briefly run through the list. Physical dysphoria, biochemical dysphoria, social dysphoria, which is what Tiraj was just talking about, societal dysphoria, sexual dysphoria, presentational dysphoria, existential dysphoria, and then it goes on to talk about managed dysphoria, imposter syndrome, a bunch of other things, and then also androgenic second puberty and estrogenic second puberty. So it's a wonderful website and resource for all of these different subtypes of dysphoria. So Tiraj, you're totally right. It is an umbrella, and there is really cool people doing this work and like tending that volume of knowledge. Yeah, if you look on the copyright on the website, you can see who it is, but I'm not going to blast it out verbally on the podcast right now. But yeah, it's it's a thing. That's a real thing.
Oh,
You're not the only person who's experienced that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I learned something today.
Yay.
So what are some of the ways that you deal with the social dysphoria?
So outside of kind of like that, like trying to schedule like the pap smear and everything, I think it's such a weird experience, and obviously not unique to like trans mass folk or trans men or anything, but just trans people, and I would imagine even non-binary folk, it's even heightened of like, for me, I started physically transitioning 3 years ago. So most of my life, like over 27 years, I've lived life very much being perceived as a cis woman, right? And so, like, how people interact with me socially, what biases they have with that has looked one way. And so, still wrapping my mind around like the way people interact with me now by how they perceive me with the way I look is so complex, and it's so hard to like digest. Just something as simple as like my spouse recently. We went to a concert, and like they, even though they identify as non-binary, they only use they them pronouns. Their expression is feminine, and we know there's a lot to unpack there with non-binary folk, right? But like at the concert, it was so interesting seeing like how like other femme presenting people would like interact and communicate and like compliment my spouse and like having like these cute like intimate like platonic moments and stuff. And I'm kind of standing there as the masked person, and like no one's like interacting with me, and I'm like having to like remember like and like kind of even cope with my inner child. I'm like, oh, it's because I'm being perceived as a man, but not just as a man, but like a black man. And I'm a Virgo. I know I have a like a resting face and all of that. I don't know if like people are perceiving me as like aggressive, even though I'm just chilling, and like the layers of that and everything. And it's just like, oh wow, like I want to like go up to like femmes all the time and be like, I love your outfit and stuff like that. But now I'm like overthinking, like, is that gonna come off as like sexual harassment now, or like different things, and being like over mindful of that and realizing that like just the different like social anxiety that comes up with like realizing like, oh wow, like things have changed within the
Yeah,
last 3 years, yeah, and adapting.
100%. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there for, I mean, doubly so for, those of us who are racialized.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you know this better than I do, but the way society views, black men versus black women is very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a lot to deal with all at once. Yeah.
Very overwhelming.
Yeah. So yeah. And I think a lot of people just like don't think about these things. Where it's just like, yeah, like there's different, like, depending on like your presentation, whether you're, more on the masculine side or more on the feminine side, or if you're, androgynously presenting, like that completely changes how people see you and how people treat you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I've definitely noticed like a huge change, like when I've started presenting femme, in like generally people are nicer when you're a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Or perceived as a woman. So
I'm glad that's been your experience. Yeah. And
yeah.
I feel like my relationship to even just being like sexualized has like shifted in like a very weird like self-gaslighting way. Like obviously like when I was more hyper femme and experiencing like misogyny, like obviously it was like yucky. I felt like I was able to speak out more like openly about like this is like gross and like kind of condemning these kind of behaviors. And
Mhm.
but experiencing being hypersexualized as like a trans mass person, I find myself like suppressing some of that. Like there's almost like this internalization of like the socialization of like men having to like be okay with that
Mm.
without like kind of thing. I don't know
Mm.
if that makes sense. And so
No, it
like
does. It does.
Black and Latino too, I've noticed that like I wouldn't have ever thought that I would have been more sexualized transition, like outside of just like the chasers, but just like
Mhm.
the Latino-ness, like I feel like there's people of like varying genders like once like poppy me all the time or like think I'm like very like spicy and like making assumptions sexually. And then there's also like the blackness of like the stereotypes of people making certain assumptions around genitalia and like what kind of
Mm.
sexual partner you would be and availability and stuff and like people being more like touchy or making more comments and it's just like okay like we're yeah like still being uncomfortable because that has never changed like my boundaries are the same
Mhm.
regardless of my gender identity but it's just like a wow this is like such a different kind of world, yeah. Or people not
Yeah.
taking it as seriously when you do like kind of vent or complain about it. Like you shouldn't be offended that people find you quote unquote attractive, but it's like it's just not.
But it's also like how they express that sentiments.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like, yeah, you can say it's like, oh, you're looking nice today. It's like, oh, you're looking nice
yes,
today.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
uh-huh.
So, Taraj, you were discussing what it was like for you being in especially like reproductive healthcare spaces and how it can feel so socially alienating as a transmasculine person. For those who maybe don't know or are new to the podcast, I, GenderMeowster, am also a non-binary transmasculine person. So I take tea and look very fluffy and used to have a uterus. I actually have had that removed, but I used to have to do all that stuff. So my inquiry is for any, let's say, gynecologists or other reproductive health folks who are maybe listening to this podcast on the off chance they made it this far. What would we wish that they would know or think about or changes that they might make um, to their practices to be more inclusive of people like us?
Yeah. Don't want to be that person to answer a question with a question, but I would love to like hear your like answers to that question too, if that's okay. For me, I definitely think I just even before you even get to be face to face with a physician, something in the intake form or whatever, already having a lot more like safety and protective factors and asking like for preferred names and like pronouns and different things like that. I know for me, um, outside of just like gender dysphoria, like I have a pretty extensive like sexual trauma history. And so that's also like adds a layer on top of the complexity of why like going to get like a pap smear is just kind of like a no, I would rather not. Like I will avoid that at all costs. Like just like the medical trauma of all that it's just really intense. But also seeing what like these topics being more like mainstream now, it just people being more mindful of the language that they use and being more inclusive. Everything is very much women centered, but we know that's also very much like cis women centered when it comes
Mhm.
to a lot of like women's health stuff. Whether it's uplifting the voices of people in these marginalized communities to talk about their experiences with medical trauma, especially racialized people, because we know the history is not in our favor, unfortunately. And um, uh, having a seat at the table to be able to talk about those things. There's so many trans mass people, trans men, non-binary people who have had miscarriages and abortions and stuff who don't get a space to be able to process and have that community care and talk about these things because they are constantly left out of the conversation, which is already even more alienating on top of this like grief process that we kind of have to deal with. Um, but creating a space where I don't know, just like medical rooms too, the way they're set up, I have so many critiques about it. Finding ways for it to be like less stimulating in terms of like lighting, things that allow us to be able to relax and feel safe in our bodies so we can even have these
Mm,
procedures done and quickly. I know that's a big thing for me is like
yeah.
it's such a big trigger that it's so easy to dissociate. And so it's like
Hmm.
if you have a tendency of people pleasing, for me, I can only speak for myself, you get that kindness for the first 20 minutes and then you start hearing the passive aggression from the practitioner of like, okay, we really can't get this done if you don't relax your legs or something like that, which only just adds shame on top of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Where maybe it could be more normalized, of saying like, you know, like I'm trying, but it's possible that we're not going to be able to get something done today or whatever, and being able to affirm the fact that the person showed up, and if you have to make another like appointment, you make another appointment. But people kind of
Hmm.
professionals just being more competent about like the unique issues that we go through and
Yeah.
ways to kind of like, you know, help us feel safe and cope with that, be more centered in our bodies.
So some of my answers might include, I think that the the care for your patients begins before they've even walked in the door. So it starts with what's on your website, what can they learn about your practice before they're even there, and think about the language. Like, are you using words like reproductive health or gynecology, or are you using words like women's health or something else that's more like there's two genders and you're this one flavored. Um, and
Like
so I
birthing
can
bodies,
say again.
like terms like birthing bodies. I know more doulas are
Yeah.
like, yeah, I love that.
Mhm. I like birthing bodies. That's a good one. Are there other phrases like that that you have found that's more gender affirming you want to list
Um,
in this moment?
I think that's the main one I've been
Yeah.
seeing people trying to switch to. Yeah.
Maybe also birth parent instead of
Yeah.
mother. That would be a good one.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, I think another thing that I have seen in one practice, and it was a non-binary doctor. The doctor themselves was non-binary, and so it made everything else like way better.
Mm.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, I can tell you a lot more about that doctor later, but we actually did a mutual aid event for that doctor back in December, and raised $12,000 to help them save their gender affirming medical practice, which is really special. But I've seen that doctor's intake paperwork, and it's like 12 pages, which at first is like, oh, that's a lot of pages. But so many of the pages are about like gender history and like gender goals. And there might even be like a body part inventory. So then people aren't assuming you do or do not have certain body parts just based off of your outward like gender expression. Um, and so like having more mindfulness about if you know that you have a trans or gender diverse patient, taking the extra time to do that. But the thing is, like doing a body part inventory is useful even for cisgender people. What if even if you're a cis woman, you may have had a breast or uterine cancer, you may not have breasts or uteri. There's only one uterus, but anyways, unless you're special, sometimes you're special and have two of them.
Yeah.
I've met more than one person with more than one uterus, but anyway, you may or may not have different body parts. And if you are, let's say, you may be a cis man, but maybe you have gone to war and you have lost limbs or other body parts, like, the actual original reason they came up with phalloplasty was for cis men that had lost their penises in war
Oh
to
wow.
stepping on mines and bombs going off and like
Mhm.
blasting their penis off their body. And so, which is horrifying. Sorry, I didn't content warning that very well. So like, sorry, everyone. Just gonna take a breath. So,
We will
yeah, a
have to
body
stop
part
from crying.
inventory is really helpful. That's a really helpful thing to have. I also have really benefited from having physicians who will make sure that pronouns are part of all of the intake paperwork, and then your pronoun is is it's either part of your name or it's in all the fields that your name appears. So then the staff have the most chances to get your pronouns correct because they're all over everything. Of course, some people just don't read, and having it written down is no substitute for actually training your staff to adequately and appropriately pronoun your people. You know, because you could walk in and the receptionist could say ma'am or sir, and you're like, I'm neither of those. How about not that? So also like any place of business, not just medical, but any place of business, not having mandatory like politeness things that include gendered phrases, like have a good day, ma'am or sir. Like don't make people do that and have to guess people's genders, because there's an entire subgroup of your customers or patients that you're alienated with that type of behavior. You could just say have a good day, no ma'am or sir, just leave it off. Have a good day, person. Like see you later.
Yeah.
Valued patient customer. Like there's other ways to show esteem without adding honorifics. Exactly, Karamia, no honorifics. So, but in terms of the actual like medical treatment, I've had like pre-op appointments with various gender affirming doctors, and they've actually taken the time to ask me, what do you refer to your like physical body parts as, so that I can refer to them in those ways. So instead of saying clitoris, in my case, we call it my penis, which is the testosterone penis or tiny penis, which makes people giggle. It's a phrase that I coined. As far as I'm aware, I haven't looked it up. Maybe other people have also coined it, but my surgeon had never heard that phrase and thought it was delightful and asked if he could use it with other patients if they wanted it. I was like, yes, let the penis spread. So, you know, talking about my clitoris as my penis, or, you know, a lot of trans men and trans masculine people I've talked to, they don't like their body part being called like a vagina. And so like front hole or cuff are some alternatives that I've encountered. I think cuff is a fun alternative to front hole or vagina, because it is what it is, right? But it doesn't have all these other associations. And like, for example, my cuff cannot birth anyone because I've had my uterus removed. And so it's like, but is it a vagina? Like anyways, so just that awareness around language can be really, really helpful. I like what you were saying, Tiraj, about being mindful about like lighting and all of the things. There was something really powerful from Dr. C's tour video from our event last December 2023. If anyone wants to go dig around in the Gender Federation and GenderMeowster archives, the footage is all there. The ask video and tour video for Dr. C's clinic is available. But Dr. C, the non-binary doctor, talks about how, especially with like those initial consults with patients, they don't take blood pressure until the end of the appointment, because often people arrive and they're all amped up from like, you know, whatever stories they're telling in their head about, this is a really important appointment, I can't mess it up, this is going to be me starting on HRT or whatever it is. And so, or this is my surgery consult, like I can't goof it up. And so like their blood is pumping, they're really going a lot. And so, and I think almost every doctor I've ever met, they always take blood pressure at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they don't want to forget. But the thing is if you're stressed, if you have medical trauma, like your blood pressure is not going to be normal. Like it's going to be like, right?
That actually
and
reminds
so that means
me
your baseline is always like, every time.
That's so rude.
that actually reminds me of a, you know, little funny anecdote. Well, it's funny to me now because this happened a while ago, but it's yeah, like I'm not fond of going to see my doctor because his office is very poorly organized and usually I have to wait for a very long time. And one particular time I had to wait a very, very long time to get seen. And then he took my blood pressure right away. And he's like, wow, your blood pressure is really high. It's like, yeah, it's because I'm pissed off. I've been waiting here for 6 hours.
Oh my God. That's so many hours.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. But yeah, it's just kind of like circling back to, you know, making it more inclusive and more kind of comfortable for trans patients. I mean, I've had some like not horrible experiences, but some negative experiences. Cause like I've had my doctor since, you know, before I realized I was trans. And, you know, you have to come out to your doctor because it's like, hey, I'm trans. I need all of these things now. And when it became clear that my trans affirming care would not be done by him, but would instead be done by my endocrinologist, he breathed an audible sigh of relief that like, oh, good, I don't have to deal with this trans stuff. That's the message that I got. And it's just like, you can't, come on, like you can't be doing that. Like it's, I mean, for us trans folks, like we have a team of medical professions because like we have our
Yeah.
GPs, we have our endocrinologists, we have our therapists, like we have, for those of us who have other issues, like you might also have other health problems going on. So it really takes like a whole team of medical, like I have something like 5 people that I see on a regular basis. So like you can't just be like, oh, good, I don't have to deal with this. Like it's, yeah,
No.
you're
Yeah. And
gonna have trans patients. If you're a GP, you're gonna have trans patients. So
Yeah.
like
it's
be ready
inevitable.
for it.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it hard for like being in like kind of like adding on to the question why I feel like more resources need to be like given to rural areas. Like for me, I live very close to a major city. Um, and so the person who prescribes me my testosterone is in that city. I moved recently. I'm 2.5 hours away. I go in to get my blood work done for my hormones twice a year. Um, Even though I would probably be able to opt out and do telehealth, I would much rather try to get the money to get gas and drive the 2.5 to see her in person and do everything there because I know they're trans affirming. Because
Mhm.
locally, there's nobody. Like I've tried, even when I'm like blatantly saying I'm trans on the phone, my voice is a little higher. Like I microdose they or she, her, and even with my name, even with my ID saying like male on it, like it's just a lot. And it's like if you're already messing up like on the phone call, I'm not even gonna like take the effort to walk into your office, like because that's already like
Mm.
I'm not comfortable. I don't feel safe enough. And I feel like too, we have to like really define what competency is. And I love that you guys mentioned it's just not for like doctors. This is goes for therapists and just any professions. When I try to seek out a therapist, way before I like early in my transitioning, um, I wanted to like kind of explore with somebody who was confident about trans issues, who worked
Mhm.
heavily with LGBT people to kind of talk about like the exploration of gender for me. Within, I think, 2 sessions, I chose this woman because on her page it said her specialty was LGBT issues, LGBT
Mhm.
clients, or like that was her clientele and everything. So I'm walking in very hyper femme, talking about like the struggles that I'm experiencing, like the thoughts of like I really think that like I'm not cis and like everything. And she immediately brushed it off as well, I've had a lot of trans men come in here, and I don't think you are because your voice is not deep. Like it was very problematic. Did not see
That's
her gonna,
Wow.
so bad.
yeah. And so
I've actually
it
had a
was
very similar experience.
really, I believe
Yeah.
that, unfortunately, and I hate that it's like a common
Yeah.
thing. And when I
Yeah.
asked her, I was like, "Can you remind me like what you're like?" I think we need to normalize asking people. Like it's totally okay to ask your therapist and question them and ask like, "What is your education? What workshops or trainings? What CEUs do you have?" Like
Mm,
justify why you're claiming you're competent, what you're competent. I love when like I did have
yeah.
clients ask me that, because I never just said something just to say something on my
Yeah.
website. And when
Mhm.
I asked her, she went to one workshop around like learning about trans terms and stuff like, and that was it. But that's what made her an expert to her. And it's like the just wild. So you really have to be
Yeah.
careful searching for care for yourself because it's like, thankfully, like I didn't internalize that completely, but I can only imagine if somebody else would have heard that same thing, how that could have just like shifted their whole trajectory of like how they view themselves or what they think like they're supposed to be doing, who they are, the self gaslighting, all the different things that like layer up. And it's just like, you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I remember when I was like very, very early on in my transition, when I was just kind of just questioning my gender, and
Yeah.
you're looking for a therapist, you're looking for like a gender therapist,
Hmm.
and like I found a therapist through our like workplace employee assistance program, and they matched me with someone, and it's like, hey, I think I might be trans. I have really persistent thoughts about being a woman,
Yeah.
and her response to that was, are you sure this isn't just like a grass is greener on the other side situation?
Oh my god.
I was like, no. So
Yeah.
I did not see her again. And
Oh,
I actually that's when I kind of like started looking for my own therapist and like it just like because like employee assistance program, for those of us who work regular 9 to 5 jobs, It's kind of meant as like a short-term solution for basic problems. It's not
Yeah.
really meant as, you know, an ongoing relationship for something you're going to deal with for the rest of your life. So you really kind of have to do your own legwork with transitions specifically, but probably a lot of other things too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And depending the state you're in, like, do we have to take more seriously that like having your gender marker being like the only validity of how somebody like presents or like says what like who they are is not enough. Like there are a lot of people who do not undergo hormone therapy or surgeries
Mhm.
and they're still valid in their transness or gender diverseness.
Mhm.
And but
Absolutely.
it's so hard when you're living under the Bible Belt. Even like I had such like conflicted feelings when I was in therapy. Like I loved the times I was able to like write letters for my clients to be able to be approved by insurance companies. And I hated the fact that that even had to really like be a thing too,
Mhm.
like the inaccessibility, because there are so many people who should be able to like, you know, have the X or change the gender marker without having to go under like invasive different decisions if they don't want to or can't or whatever the reason is why they don't want to like
Yeah.
choose that. And it's just so like it's so limiting. And I always like recognize my privilege to be able to like go through that and like the state I am, like being able to change my name, my birth certificate and everything. And it's
Mhm.
just like I grieve for a lot of my trans kids who like
Oh
can't accept
yeah, it's a
uh,
huge hassle, and there's a
uh,
financial burden as well because these things aren't free to do.
no.
So like, I mean, like I personally know like some trans folks that like can't do it because they can't afford it. Like they
Yeah.
can't like for them like $200 is a lot of money. So that
Uh-huh.
yeah, that's like if they spend $200 on this, that means there's a couple of weeks where they can't eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Well,
like
and
it's
that's
tough.
why engaging with like trans mutual aid is such an important
Mhm.
activity. Um, I know that we have Gender Federation to do the bigger events for trans mutual aid, but there's also all kinds of ways that folks can do it in smaller ways. You know, even just looking on social media for hashtag trans mutual aid. Tiraj, do you know of any like Black or BIPOC specific hashtags for mutual aid for trans people that
Uh,
people could keep in mind if they're looking?
outside of the ones you said, I cannot think of. Um,
Maybe
because
just the
I know,
combination of trans mutual aid and Black, like hashtag Black. I don't know. Maybe that could be a way.
yeah. And I know at least for Instagram specifically, I'm not too aware of like different social medias, but Instagram, I know
Mhm.
people will also like use different terms or spell things differently because of all the shadow banning by
Yeah.
using those certain
Hmm.
terms and stuff. So it's so hard. You really have to like it's like a
Yeah.
puzzle trying to things just to try to give care to people.
Yeah. And that's part of why like private social media, like a Discord server or like a Mastodon instance, is so powerful because you don't
Yeah.
have shadow banning. You don't have all of this like, oh yes, we're going to dampen down the marginalized voices because the algorithm or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I had I had a couple more thoughts on our on this topic that I jotted down that I wanted to share, and then I have another question that I came up with as a response to what we've been talking about. Um, so in terms of a couple more thoughts about any sort of medical provider, either physical medicine or mental health medicine. Here's some more thoughts on like making spaces more accessible to trans people. I think that having really clearly marked bathrooms and either like non-gendered bathrooms or like a very clear third bathroom that is not only wheelchair accessible but is also all genders or family restroom. Like you don't have to make it trans and put the trans flag on it and all that stuff. If you're like, we don't want to be that obvious, but just call it a family restroom. Just call
Hmm.
it a family restroom, single use, lockable door. Like no one's gonna walk in on you. Probably put a sharps container in there, so if people need to take their HRT or their diabetic medicine or whatever else injectable medicine they need to take, they have somewhere to safely throw that away. Um, but yeah, those are some things I think, you know, I've seen signage in bathrooms that refer to things as uh like women's products, like, oh, don't throw your feminine napkin in the trash can. It's like, how about you just call it menstrual products? Because we are menstruating. Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
that is technically correct. It's not this really obviously trans word, but it's also not declaratively female or feminine or woman. So it's kind of a stealth thing, and so it's more neutral. It's not like, you know, trans forward, like put your man pad in the trash can. Like, I'm not, that's not what we're asking for. Just
No, yeah.
nice product, which
Oh
is
my God,
accurate. It's
imagine.
just accurate. um so what else did I write? Thinking about like the lobby experience, like um I mean, this gets into like the intersection of disability, but like, where am I going to park my wheelchair? You know, is there like COVID procedures or policies? Do you have masks for people who need or want them? Um, you know, I know for me, it really helps to see COVID information for any event I'm attending on a website ahead of time. And I want to see the year on it, because what I don't trust is that someone wrote it in 2020. They just forgot to update the website. And then I show up thinking it's going to be one way and it's a totally different way. So putting the date on it is really helpful for me. Um, I like what you were saying about lighting, Tiraj, and like, oh, it's so bright. And so like having lighting options, like I know for me, if I'm going to see a doctor for any sort of genital anything, like I sit in the chair, not on the table, until I must sit on the table, because I don't want to be on that uncomfortable table any longer than possible. And for neurospicy people who are light sensitive, like I am, like having not overhead lights is great. Like
Yeah.
I don't like, I know that sometimes you need the overhead lights. You can really see if you're doing a procedure, and that makes total sense. But like, maybe that's not the default. Could we start with less lights and just turn that on when we need it, or have like a task light that is just for that task and it's not this big floodlight?
Yeah.
Um, that's another helpful thing. You had mentioned like pap smears, and maybe it's with a gynecologist, and they're making comments about, you know, if you're not relaxing enough or whatever. Something that I have found really helpful is I actually have my primary care physician do any of the pap smear stuff, because we have an ongoing like relationship. Like because of all the various meds I'm on, I'm seeing the doctor about once a month to once every 3 months. That's the frequency right now. And so like we talk all the time, and I'm close with my doctor. Like I trust them. Like they get me, they get my neurospicy, they get my trans stuff. And so like, you know, I'm not like jumping at the opportunity to let some random gynecologist I've never met like give me a pelvic exam. But if it's someone that I've talked to a bunch of times, like your primary care physician, general practitioners are supposed to know how to do basic stuff like that. Like like maybe I'd go see a gynecologist if I had some sort of complicated, like, oh, you've got some weird cyst thing going on, like we should probably see a specialist. But like, you know, some of those basic routine checks, like if you have a good relationship with your primary care physician, hopefully you can just schedule with them. And then it's someone that you have more of a rapport with. And for me, at least, it's a lot more emotionally feasible to have any sort of pelvic exam. Um, and then the final thing that I wrote down on this topic is, personally, I actually love telemedicine as a disabled person. Like um, going out means I have to find my mask. I have to load the wheelchair into the car. I drive to the place. I have to park in the disabled parking spot, get the wheelchair out of the car, which I cannot do myself right now. I need an arm to get that out of the car. We haven't bought it yet. It's $2,000. And so the wheelchair itself was $3,500 that we also paid out of pocket through a mutual aid fundraiser that we did on stream. Thank you, chat, for funding my chair. That was very generous of you. But I can't get it out of the car myself. My wife can. So she has to take half a day off work to go with me to a medical appointment. And so there's all of these things, right? And then we have to sit in the lobby. We wait an hour or more because the doctor is always busy and, you know, has ADHD and gets distracted. And, you know, I don't help because I have a lot of questions, and I always try to stuff more into our 15-minute air quotes appointment than actually fits.
So you're part of the
um,
problem, is what you're
I
saying.
am, but I'm usually scheduled at the end of the day. I'm like the last patient so that it doesn't impact other people. I intentionally put myself at the end of the day so that I'm not messing everyone else up. My doctor and I just talk until we're done.
You
Um,
saying this though, I'm so glad you brought up like the telehealth and like insurance. Like if anyone even has the privilege to have like health insurance, I've heard a lot recently that they've been a lot of insurance companies are not paying for telehealth for a lot of things now recently. So it just depends. Obviously, you have to check in with your like specific like provider and packages and all that
yeah.
stuff. I know like for me, um, they'll pay for one telehealth, but then I have to find a way out there for like my second physical, or I have to pay out of pocket for it, which sucks. And I know for me, when I before I left the field of therapy, when the pandemic started, I kind of switched from in person to like just straight telehealth. And
Mhm.
for the reasons you were saying, I love the accessibility, especially with the type of clients I was working with. It was just more
Yeah.
feasible. And so all my caseload was telehealth. I moved 2 hours away from like the office because I work for a nonprofit. And then like now coming up to like the last few 6 months, my supervisor was like, um, kind of like not giving me new clients because I don't know what kind of contract they had with the nonprofit and everything else or whatever, but like basically you had to have a certain type of licensure to be able to like start billing in a certain way. Otherwise you had to have someone like kind of like sign behind you and all that. So she
Yeah.
wasn't giving me new people. And so like there were people who I was doing therapy with for like over 3 years who had like DID systems, who I knew really well, deep trauma
Mhm.
histories, like
Yeah.
different things that like they just wanted me to up and like transfer to someone else. And when I like even tried to like mention this to my clients, like they were just like, it was almost like making them regress because it was like, I want to start over with someone new. Like, why can't I continue
Yeah.
with you? It's like
Yeah.
putting in a weird place because like I don't want to give y'all up either. And they're like, but they're not allowing me either to be able to like move forward with this unless like I move back to like the place I was, and it was just like so
Yeah.
complicated. Yeah, sucks for
You know
people.
what my mental health therapist ended up doing when he was in a similar situation is he opened a private practice and
Hmm.
just stopped taking insurance and was like, I'm just doing cash pay. And the one thing that he does accept still is it's called Lyra or Lyra Health. And that's like for people who, my wife has a fancy tech job. I don't. This is my job. This is it. Here, we're doing it. But my wife has a tech job. And so we get Lyra through her like benefits package. And so you get 12 sessions a year. And anyone who takes Lyra, you can go. And it's like, they get like therapists get paid like the same day they submit the thing. And there's not all these extra crap you got to do. It's way easier to submit. And so, yeah, my therapist was like, "Yeah, all this other stuff is really complex, and I'm just going to do this instead." And so, thankfully, I still have some of my 12 left for the year, so I get to see him with that, and it's just really simple. Um, it is frustrating that insurance companies can make getting your benefits actually paid for so complicated to access that people just stop doing it. That's what they want, right? They want to make it
Yeah,
hard so they get your money and they don't have to pay for anything.
yeah.
Um, so this actually kind of dovetails somewhat nicely into the next question I have, which is, um, do do either of you have any suggestions for how to find trans affirming mental and physical healthcare providers? I know I have some, but I want to give others a chance to go first.
Right. And I don't have any like specific websites off the top of my head. I know for me, it was definitely important um, to try to find gender diverse therapists myself, but also are either brown or black themselves, just because of the intersections and things I deal with. Um, for me, it's very difficult to find that. And then when I do find one who is like seems perfect, they are in direct practice, and even with a sliding scale, it can be kind of hard for me to meet my needs. Um, I kind of just use those key terms in Google and try to just find the best that way, but I can't think of any like directory off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in
What
like
about
in my
you,
case,
Miranda?
like there's a lot of stuff that's like kind of specific to Canada because like our system is a little bit different. But in terms of like looking for trans affirming like for like physical like transition care, um, it's kind of like the Wild West out here. So it's some places will work on an informed consent model, and other places will still require letter from psychologists and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So um, yeah, and often there'll be quite long wait lists for that sort of thing. So I got lucky, like so I was able to find an endocrinologist here, like locally here, that does work on informed consent, and so that worked out. In terms of finding like trans affirming mental care, so this is probably not shocking news to anyone, but turns out a lot more people needed therapy during the pandemic. So that actually made it quite difficult to find a therapist. particularly one that like specializes in LGBTQ issues. Not because like there aren't any, it's just because they're all full, like they're booked up, they're not accepting new clients. So, but yeah, it's really it's like you just kind of Google, you go through like the various directories of mental health professionals, and you try to find ones that like have keywords that match up with what you're looking for, and just kind of email all of them because like a lot of them are just not going to be taking new clients. So yeah, it's kind of a crapshoot. You just have to play the numbers game.
I will say, so definitely a little off topic, not so it's not like medical professionals, but I know Strands for Trans is a really good website that I used to find like a good trans affirming barber. They have different
Oh,
like hair salons and stuff on there. I don't this kind of goes back to like the social dysphoria piece a little bit. For me, finding someone who is like can cut my hair texture specifically, um, is also like it was like a weird place because it was also very cis heteronormative, and so I was very uncomfortable going in those spaces because I feel like I was being perceived as so I wasn't being clocked as trans, but I feel like the hyper masculine men in those barbershops were definitely like
mm,
perceiving me as a gay man, which comes with like a whole different type of like
yeah, yeah, I can see that.
so my anxiety was through the roof. So finding somebody through that website locally has been like beautiful. So it's like a hair salon that's like very, very LGBT like friendly. They have a lot of like
Mhm.
it's like the dye jobs and everything in the front, and there's one barber in the back. And he, from my knowledge, is cis hetero, but is an ally and everything, knows I'm trans, talks doesn't like really like ask invasive questions, doesn't make a lot of like small talk that's like misogynistic or homophobic or anything like that. Like just asks me about my art is very just like very chill vibes and I feel really comfortable. But that might be a good website to put in like your state and kind of see if anything like
Yeah.
that other businesses are around because
Yeah. So like I mean, I also had to look for a hair salon that was, trans
definitely
affirming. So
yeah.
it's so I mean, there was no like directory. So like we have directories, but they're not updated. So like it's just like, oh, it's like and like weirdly during the pandemic, a lot of places went out of business. So like
Yes. Oh yeah.
so like these directories are basically useless. So what I end up doing is I just kind of like look in my area on Google and just look because like Google will actually identify places that are LGBTQ friendly. So they'll have like a little rainbow like emoji there, and it's like it'll say like oh, it'll say like women owned or stuff like that. So and then I go onto their website and like if they don't have a section on their website that like is like hey like we like everyone's welcome here like or we support all of our LGBTQ people. It's if they don't have like something like that on their website, then I could just kind of move on.
Okay.
But I'm also fortunate in that I live in kind of like a trendy hipster area. So like places like it's full of places like that. So like the area of town where I live is very like, queer friendly. So that hasn't really been an issue, luckily.
Um,
That's
the one suggestion I haven't heard either of you share is ask your trans friends. So step one, make trans friends. Step two,
yes.
ask them for referrals because word of mouth is the best way.
Oh
But
yeah.
So I learned about my barber's non-binary. I've talked about this on the show before. My barber's non-binary.
We've had them on
My
the show
MD
before.
doctor is non-binary. We've also had my doctor on the show before.
Yes.
And my therapist is a trans man. And so I didn't know about my MD doctor until I was talking to my therapist and I said, is there literally anyone in a multi-county radius who is trans and is practicing medicine? And my therapist was like, there's one who's out. So then that part of me is like, who are the others who aren't out? I'm so curious. It's not my business, but I want to know. But it's not my business. Um, so yeah, so like he helped me find my doctor and my barber, a different friend was looking for a barber who was like trans affirming or whatever who would get it right and posted on some sort of affinity group. I think it was a Facebook group for like local queer people or local trans people. I got a bunch of recommendations and so then I went to go see my barber um, from that recommendation, and I see my barber like once every 5 or 6 weeks, and like we start with a hug. It's like I greet them outside and we
Aw.
hug each other, we go in for a haircut, and it's great because It's a barber chair in a room that's the only chair in the room. So it's not this big open concept thing. So like, I show up and I'm wearing my mask and they're wearing their mask and I'm not having to worry about everyone else's COVID, whatever, because it's just the two of us and we can, communicate about it. And my barber's so thoughtful because they also got unscented hair products because I had expressed that like scented hair products do not work for me at all. Like it's too sensory overload, can't do it. And they're just so sensitive and thoughtful about like neurospiciness too, which is often comorbid with being trans. Comorbid is such a weird word, but it is the technical term. It happens a lot that the Venn diagram of people who are autistic and people who are trans, there is a lot of overlap. So anyway, the thing is, if you have care providers for healthcare of any flavor, if it's your hair, if it's your body, if it's your mind, if they are also the marginalized identities that you have, it is often that they will just get it in a deeper way. And then for me, at least, I'm not spending a bunch of energy explaining oppression to my person.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't want to explain oppression to my therapist. Like, no, thank you. Thankfully, I don't have to. And so, yeah, that's part of why, like local queer and trans communities are so valuable. Like I have an online thing that is really great and I love the Discord server and there's a lot of wonderful and enriching conversations and interactions and peer support that can happen in that space. Because it's the internet and you want to be careful about people knowing where you live, etc., it's harder to get into those specific recommendations of like what surgeon is the good one or what, therapist is the good one. And so finding any local, especially trans, but also queer affinity groups to talk about those things is really useful. Yeah. So I see in the chat finding plural inclusive therapists is hard. Yes. You're not the first plural system who's shared that, friend. I hear you. It is very challenging. They are out there. You have to find the therapists who are plural themselves, but are they disclosing that on their professional websites? Probably not. So then you have to ask in plural communities that are like local plural communities, like, hey, they might be stealth, but like, are there any like trans or like plural inclusive therapists? Anybody got any tips? Like, so it really is like, I don't know. I like to call it like the trans phone tree or the like, it's the community piece. It's asking your fellow real life human beings who are trying to figure out these things. Yeah. So I just wanted to remind people that like that is one of the powers of breaking out of isolation is having access to the community power that is such a bigger power than yourself. It's really powerful and important. Yeah. Okay.
And I think just as a little tip, if you're looking for a therapist who is competent with kind of like plurals and things like that, the language you might see on their website will probably say like parts work is the type of therapy maybe that they do. And so if you see that, that might be a little bit of a green flag. Definitely still have your additional questions and, trust yourself what feels right. But
what about if someone has internal family systems? Is that a red flag or a yellow flag or a green flag or none of them?
external family systems in the context of working with people
who are
who are
plural.
plural, I will say yellow.
Mhm.
It can be green. So it just definitely depends on like how they're utilizing it, right? I feel like there are some therapists who make the assumption that people want integration, and that is not always the case, and things like and so like I think making sure that no, maybe having the language being person centered in addition to that will make it more green leaning, in my opinion, because then they're not pretending to be the expert of you. They're flowing with the information you're giving them, and they're working with you to meet your goals. But you are ultimately the expert, which is really affirming. But
I like that. That's a really good tip. People didn't know we'd be getting plural tips with Tiraj today, but here we are.
Yeah.
Bonus content. Thanks for showing up.
Yes.
It's one of the benefits of having the live chat is they ask questions that we didn't plan ahead, and it enriches the conversation.
This one's free. If you want more, you have to sign up for our Patreon. So I'm going to do a hard segue to our next question, and this is one I probably have some thoughts on. And as a non-white person, I definitely have thoughts on this. So, what do you wish that white people understood better about the intersection of gender and race?
Okay, I feel like this could be like another like several hours long conversation.
Oh
So let me
boy,
try to right,
oh
but
boy. I mean, I have a lot of my own thoughts on this, but I want to hear yours.
okay. The intersection of race and gender. It's just so it's so in the most simplest terms, it's just different, especially with the concept of the gender binary stemming from white supremacy to begin with.
Yes.
Like I have a lot of thoughts around that, around gender colonialism, just like the gender binary being imposed on non-Western people to begin with, right? We think of indigenous people, we think of just like the non-Western part of the world and everything, hetero, patriarchy, just all the different little pillars of white supremacy and how
Mm,
those things just further justify racism too. I think of like the Enlightenment period where just like how the genitalia of like Black women was like hyper masculinized and
mhm,
called animalistic, and the fact that there were like sex differences between men and women in these binary terms when it came to marginalized like racial identities, and that being a justification for white people to see us as inferior. And so how like gender nonconformity and just like the binaries, binary thinking, and all these different things, they just go hand in hand with racism. And a lot of the topics that we talked about, and medical trauma, and different things like that. But it's just a lot. Just even just like with just going back to like social dysphoria and like the perception and stuff like that. Like I'm constantly like, the reason why I have my new therapist now is like being able to process that like, oh my goodness, I am perceived as a Black man, and I have to like consider things and new fears that are unlocked that I did not have before when I was
yeah.
like moving
Mhm.
through this world as like Afro Latina. And so it's just like just the complexities of that and the fear and having to have these like conversations with people, and like it's just it's just a lot. And the lack of grace, I feel like, as like racialized people, that we get to in the ways that we like choose to express our gender. Um, Sometimes I feel like the things that are seen as like so liberating that white people do, that we kind of get critiqued harsher on when it's like we're unpacking our own internalized things from white supremacy and stuff, but we don't get the grace that they do sometimes. That's just so
Mhm,
like, yeah, just it's
yeah.
so much.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, so I've said this before a bunch of times. So for those longtime listeners of the show, probably have already heard this spiel, but I think there's for those of us who are racialized, that transition, have a vastly different experience from folks who are, aren't part of a marginalized group before they transition. So like your white cis hets who they transition and then they are experiencing marginalization for the first time. Whereas the rest of us have been marginalized our whole lives. So like, okay, yeah, I came out as trans, but like I was dealing with racism like my whole life before that. So it's like, yeah, this is just like one more layer. But for people who don't have that, who are in a privileged group, they it's like, oh, this is what it's like to be marginalized. Where it's just like, okay, yeah, that's nice, like pat on the head.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, so that's something that I really kind of harp on white people for is like it's like yes, that's great that you now have this perspective, but like be mindful of those of us that like have dealt with this our whole lives and have to deal with it on multiple intersectional layers. Because like you might like a white trans person might face I don't want to downplay this. Like, this is, it's horrible that this happens, but, they might get, receive hate or be marginalized for being trans. But the rest of us are marginalized for being trans, for being non-white, for being maybe an immigrant or maybe not having an accent or like, just it's a whole
Yes.
list of things. So this is something, I mean, I can and have ranted about this for a while. So, but yeah, that's kind of like what I wish white people would understand and take more seriously, because like, I mean, I don't want to turn this into the oppression Olympics, but like
Yeah.
you're a newcomer to the oppression. We
Yes.
were born into the oppressions.
Yes. Our threshold a lot for like the stresses around these kind of things is a little bit high. So it's like seeing
Yeah.
sometimes the valid emotional reactions they go through. Sometimes we're kind of like been there, kind of like, okay, welcome to this,
Yes,
but like,
welcome.
yeah. And I think like sometimes our frustration, especially on social media and when the age of influencers and everything, it's frustrating when people, at least in my opinion, in my experience, like seeing like white queers, kind of like have these very these think pieces that many racialized people have said a bunch of times, but I feel like when we say it is like we're getting chewed out. But then when it's
Mhm.
like white trans influencer who is like very digestible, thin bodied, and all of that, doesn't have any
Yeah.
disabilities and everything, says it, everyone eats it up and just is like, oh my God, you're very like revolutionary and this is like the greatest thing I've ever heard kind of thing. When it's like, especially if you're like speaking for a community versus with, using your privilege, the privilege that exists there, to just like uplift the voices of the people who are already in that community who have already talked about those things. Like me as a thin bodied person, I'm not gonna like write a think piece about like fat phobia, even though like I have very strong opinions about that. I'm gonna uplift the voices of like
Yeah, absolutely.
fat folk in the community who have already like voiced depression. They know their issues better than anyone else, and I'm gonna like share,
Mhm.
give credit and all that. I'm not gonna like take credit and make it seem like oh I'm just so knowledgeable about all the things and like kind of do like performative activism, like use your privilege where it needs to be used kind of thing and
Yeah.
give
Yeah,
people
it's
the
about using your
flowers while
platform responsibly. I mean,
yeah.
we have a saying within our, you know, the video essayist community is you have to know when it's your turn to talk, and when it's your turn to kind of step aside and let other people talk.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like again, your example, it's like as a thin body person, if the current topic of the day is fat phobia, and it's like, well, it's not your turn to talk. But
Yeah,
if the topic is, you know, being a racialized trans mass person, then it's your turn to talk, and this is where we should be uplifting your voice.
absolutely. And I think in addition to your question too, um, Black femmes and brown femmes specifically, but adding the intersection of fatness and other things too, and being darker skinned too, there's a bias of these type of people being more masculinized.
Yeah.
And so when you think of like non-binary people in these communities too, I don't think that sometimes we have a problem with it. I think like our racialized communities too, but definitely like white trans people being more mindful of that. Like androgyny is a very specific term that looks a very specific way because of
Mhm.
whiteness is usually very flat chested, thin bodied, like a certain like, and not making the assumption just in general, regardless of like race or gender identity, that like just because someone expresses themselves a certain way that they are, they use certain pronouns and different things. Like I know that's something like my spouse and I talk about a lot. We are probably seen as like a hetero passive couple because I'm masculine and they're feminine. They're non-binary though. They are short, darker skin, fat, and people will she, her them to death. Like it doesn't matter
Mhm.
how many times they have to like say it and everything. And seeing a lot of those projections, even from people within the community and non-black people, is I've just seen how much it's hurt them. So I can only imagine how that extends to just like other people within our own racial communities too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just, oh man.
it's a,
Yeah, it
just
really is like,
it's a lot. Yeah.
yeah, it's like whenever I get together with you know, another racialized trans person, it's just like, yeah, it's like we're just kind of like sharing each other's stories, and it's like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did want to give Meowster a chance to because these next couple questions are very much out of my wheelhouse, and they're very much more into Meowster's wheelhouse. So
That's true.
I will cede the floor to you.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to ask about astrology. Tiraj, how has your passion for astrology contributed to the way that you embody your gender?
Oh my gosh, I love astrology. Now, this is something that I could like talk about forever and like info dump on. um, like I feel like once I started learning about like just like the full birth charts and um I consider myself a spiritual person, not like organized religion, but very much into like ancestral wisdom and like divination, tarot, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like breaking down my own birth chart was empowering in the sense of just like self-awareness and self-reflection and like a fun way of kind of like breaking down different things, especially when it comes down to like astrological houses. And I feel like astrology was like one of those fun hobbies like I picked up an interest that like also in a way that I didn't expect challenged a lot of the internalized social norms I had that were more binary and like kind of shifting to a place of like, oh, there's these different energies that I embody, like both masculine and feminine and otherwise, and like how all of that makes up this holistic, beautiful being that I am that deserves like grace and love and support and all these different things and help me kind of move toward a path of like what is authentic for me and what does authentic living will look like for me versus the projections of like other people wanting me to be more like masculine or other people wanting to be more feminine or anything like that. Being able to quiet all of that and just think of like what I'm made of and like the stars and all of that. And like I love how like the houses, like especially like the fourth house, if anyone's really into astrology, is like very much around like womanhood and femininity and mother, and this could be even like mother wounds and all that kind of stuff. And the tenth house is like masculinity and like men in your life, fatherhood, fathers, father wounds potentially, and different things like that and tapping into like the fifth house around like childlike joy and self-expression and creativity and like seeing like what sign that's in and how that's supposed to look like and stuff and seeing that there's such a like beautiful balance in it and how we kind of have like a little bit of everything and I think for me it just goes back to this like collectiveness of like seeing myself as like one with other people and that like we're all kind of like mirrors or like triggering different things and like shadows within each other. And like, at least for me, in a way, it's healing because I think it allows me to detach in a healthy amount to be able to realize, like, oh, like I'm grateful for these experiences, negative or positive, because it's showing me something I still need to maybe like process that I thought I was over and I wasn't, or whatever, right? Like this interaction I've had, or like crossing paths with a certain person and different things. But like knowing like kind of like what signs are considered like masculine or feminine and different things like that, and knowing that like the fluidity of my chart just is like a bigger picture of the fluidity I have and how it's important for me to embrace that fluidity also kind of centers me. And knowing that like for me at least, being able to more so in the beginning of my transition and coping with kind of being misgendered and stuff like that, I was able to reframe it and like if people she heard me or anything like that, like they are resonating or connecting with like a more feminine side of myself. Like obviously we all internalize kind of like a very binary way of looking at sex and gender. We're all at different places of like kind of processing that, right? But giving other people a little bit more grace and not transphobes or people who are like super violent. I'm definitely not talking about that, but very like specific types of people. Um, it allowed me at least to like kind of like reframe that and cope in a way of knowing that like even like interacting with children, like and I like look the way I look or whatever, but whatever they're resonating with, it's more of the like nurturing part of me or like this part or whatever. Like my big three, I'm a Virgo sun, Capricorn moon, Cancer rising. I have like the astrological daddy and mommy in my big three or whatever. So it's like very balanced. And so for me, I really enjoy um kind of like being androgynous is actually kind of like euphoric for me for people to kind of sometimes feel like oh, I don't know what they are or whatever, like that actually makes me feel good. I like being an enigma. I like not being easily figured out and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, because I had to shift from a place of having so much social anxiety and caring so much about what people look. For me, liberation is getting to a place where it's like, I know I'm not I'm not made for people to like consume or understand. Like I'm still figuring out myself, and it gives me grace to still make mistakes and not know the answers. Like sometimes the most liberating thing for my perfectionist self to be able to say is, I don't know. I don't know who I am sometimes, and that's okay. I'm just being able to sit in that alone, which is that's a lot. It's really hard for people to be able to sit in that sometimes. At least for me, like it's I always want to know the answers. I'm very much earth dominant. Have to kind of like be in control, which I know is a trauma response, wanting to like protect yourself and all that kind of stuff. But it's like sometimes it's just okay to just not always be trying to heal 24/7. Like it's okay to just rest and
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
not do anything and not be self-reflective and like not have all the answers. Yeah.
Honestly, like the smartest thing you can say most of the time is I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm worried of people who claim to have all the answers because
Oh
nobody has all.
no,
So
super like yeah.
I love all the things you just said. Um, I am definitely more deeply familiar with tarot than astrology,
Ooh,
but I do know that I'm a quadruple Leo, and I
ooh, a
have a
step.
ton of Leo and Virgo in my inner planets. So I'm just like this mix of earth and fire all the way through, until you get to like the generational planets. So yeah, just like I'm fiery, but because of the earthiness, I get stuff done, which is great.
Yeah, grounded.
Yeah, it's like I'm excited, but now let's actually do the work part
Yeah, yeah,
instead of just have lots of ideas forever because that doesn't get things done.
yeah,
love
yeah,
that.
yeah. So
Um,
I know very little about astrology. So, but like it's because like I'm very like science minded.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I tend to approach things from a materialist like scientific perspective. So, but I also try not to be a jerk about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so like I recognize that like it has value to a lot of people. Like
yeah,
even though
yeah.
it's not like scientifically accurate or whatever,
Mhm.
um, like if you're getting some value of it, if it's helping your life and you're not harming others and you're not using it, the one I really take issue with is if you're not using it to take advantage of others. Um, whatever, who cares? Like do whatever makes you happy. Life is short. So
Uh,
yeah.
Mirami says, "Oh my God, do you get all the ideas though?" I did say quadruple Leo. I know ideas are usually more air signs, but I don't know. I get passionate. I get excited about stuff. I also will blame that on the ADHD. Um, Tiraj, how has astrology helped you to unlearn cis heteronormativity?
um, oh my goodness, I might have already answered this, but I think just kind of, I think in a more general sense of just like feeling like you have to look at things in a very like black and white binary type of box. I think like what the funness of astrology to me, or even just like tarot or like certain kind of divination work, it's just like again like this bigger picture of just embracing fluidity, going beyond, challenging me to go beyond what I thought I knew and pushing past those boxes of what like I thought was possible, but what else I can kind of like dive into. Um, Beyond like maybe what I grew up seeing and seeing as normalized or what was normalized in the media of like how relationships look like, not just romantic, but learning about non-ethical monogamy, trying to figure out is that something that I'm into, is it not? And like what do my there's all different types of intimacy and like being able to like set boundaries with people of like, well, being more specific of like what type of intimacy I want to advocate for it with different people and in different type of relationships and creating this fullness of like who I am, what fulfills me, and just feels authentic and is in alignment with kind of my integrity and who I am and who I would ideally like to be. Because I do think that we create who we want to be. I think we put a lot of pressure on like trying to find who we are, and sometimes people get stuck there when I think that's a way of giving away a little bit of our power and control when we have a lot more control over some things than we maybe give ourselves credit for or have been convinced otherwise because of situations and trauma and everything hijacking us. But um, we really can create the kind of life that we desire and deserve.
I love that. Okay, chat is really excited to see your artwork.
I'm
Yeah.
excited to see the artwork.
I'm wondering
Really?
I
if
love
you
art.
would
I
like to do
love
a little
art. I
show
want
and
to see it.
tell for us.
So I'm so glad that you at least said Cubism and you did not bring up Picasso, because often um
Oh,
I
Picasso was
feel
a doo-doo head, so I don't want to talk
thank
about
you.
him.
Okay, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I figured it was a read the room situation. I know typically when I show art lovers, and it tends to be like white art lovers, which I know they have good intentions. They'll be like, "Oh, this reminds me of Picasso," and it's like, yeah, because he definitely like stole his style from looking at African masks. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I
we're
mean,
not
he
going
wasn't
to.
the only person to use that style.
Yeah,
Like,
also, thank you. Definitely not the
yes.
like father of
And
Cubism.
again,
Yes.
like I'm not a, like I'm very much like, baby's first art class kind of person. So
um,
like it's,
let's see. So a lot of like my paintings in the background that I still have to like kind of finish and varnish. Um, my family is indigenous to Borican, which is the colonized name for Puerto Rico. I have a ton of family who lives out there. My father was born and raised out there. And I grew up with a lot of like indigenous stories of the Taino people, and so a lot of like my paintings are like based on those stories. So this is one called "The Legend of the Hummingbird." It's a really beautiful story. If anyone's interested, I definitely encourage like Googling some of those like Puerto Rican legend stories. They're very short, usually like a paragraph or two. But a lot of my art is around that. Like this one is also around like pokey frogs out there. Um, and a lot of my other stuff is mostly on my iPad. Because I do everything at home, so I just kind of print once stuff comes through, not to waste paper or anything, but give me one second. I'm working on like this wolf tote bag back there, and in
oh
the
yeah,
back
yeah, I saw that.
the wording says like "you are not alone," and I have to like paint that.
Mm.
Oh, I love
Really
that.
big on like, affirmations and kind of mental health art, but let's
So
see.
my eye was really going to the that figure you had in the background, the black and white mask with the star.
Black and white maps.
Maybe the colors. Well, no, on the bottom there. So it looks like
Put
a
down here.
person. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. My eye kept going to that one because that looks really neat.
Thank you.
Oh, it's not a mask. Okay, I see it better now. Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool. I really like that one.
I appreciate that.
There's a lot of symbolism I could read into that one.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. And I feel
So,
like when I think of
Tiraj,
like
if we
the
want
art,
to join the Mask Force, we go to your website and join the Mask Force. Is that your mailing list name? I love that.
thank you.
Shapesoftiraj.com, friends. I put the URL in the chat for you.
Yes. So I have with the Mass Force, I have a section on my website. I want to start a project soon. I have a bunch of like blank masks where it gives people a space to be able to like type something like a repressed or suppressed part of yourself that you want to share, whether it's a like a thought, intrusive or not, something maybe you internalize that's not yours, something you would like other people to know, but maybe you just never had the space to be able to share that. It's all anonymous. And when those come in, I want to be able to like paint them on the back of the mask and kind of like reveal them. And I don't know if you guys, there's a really big account on Instagram, and he does something like a kind of similar project, like things I've never said. And he's a photographer. He takes pictures and he kind of like blacks out the people in it and will like handwrite kind of like all the things that people have been through. It is really beautiful. Like he probably like shares like 10 at a time, and people will the sense of community in the comments is like I'm always crying, and I'm not a crier at
Oh,
all, but it's like so deep. Like people will talk about like grief, the loss of people, just really vulnerable things that like I feel like most people like experience and feel, but they don't have, whether it's shame that's kind of just like bearing it down, or they don't have no one to talk to, and just having that like release and seeing other people in the comments, since it's all anonymous, and just being like sharing sweet words for like slide 3 or whatever. Like I can also relate to that because I lost my dad last year to COVID or something, and da 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 da. I also experienced like certain ideation thoughts or like this and that, or I never planned past like this certain birthday. So I just feel so lost in life because I didn't think I'd still be here and stuff like that.
Ooh, that's
Uh,
mood.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I want to have more projects and stuff where I kind of combine my mental health and therapy skills, but intersecting it with my art. And one reason why I kind of want to go into like more life coaching is like a limitation with like therapy versus like life coaching is like also whatever the state you're licensed in to be a therapist, you can only provide therapy to people in those states. And I feel like the population I wanted to work with and the things I wanted to do with people that was just too limited. I wasn't gonna be able to do what I wanted to do or needed to do with the populations I wanted to work with in that way. And so also shifting to more like a creative avenue, doing like life coaching and stuff like that. I could still be able to like move around that, but help people meet those goals, whatever they are, in an
Yeah.
ethical way and stuff too. Creatively. Yeah.
You also have Art for Palestine, and I feel I would be remiss if I didn't point that out to chat. There are lovely prints available for 35, I believe, US dollars, right? Not Canadian dollars or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and to describe some of these images for those listening that don't have it, the website pulled up, or if you are listening and not looking at the video stream version of this, there are two really lovely pieces of art. I wonder if you feel like describing them for us, Tiraj.
Yeah. For the art for Palestine, the first one, the most popular one is I Can Make a Difference. Um, and it's a little bit more abstract, and it has some different shapes. All my paper prints, I print on bamboo paper because it's very textured. It's really soft. And it kind of looks like it has this effect on the design where it looks like kind of like crumpled paper or like water a little bit. But
Hmm.
this design has mostly a very, very pale yellow, oranges, reds, greens, black. Um, and it kind of looks like different like buildings and stuff. And that was more so inspired by all the images I was kind of seeing flood through from the Gaza Strip and everything. And then the second one
There's
is
only 100 available, chat.
only 100.
Only 100. Get on it.
So I number them, I hand sign them, and I include other little cute goodies inside. I always write a handwritten letter in very Venus and Cancer fashion with all my packages, even beyond the Art for
Love that.
Palestine.
So you're getting little love notes if you get prints from you. That's so
And
good.
the second print is of like three figures. So you kind of see faces in different hues and colors. And one is like looking forward, and the other two are looking at each other. And that one is called Embracing My Legacy. And those two prints specifically, I don't profit anything. I donate 100% of net profit to PCRF's Gaza
Pa-
Pediatric.
Palis- Palestine Children's Relief Fund.
Yes, we've donated. I just had another package come in today, actually. So we're close to $500 that I've donated. So
That's amazing. Congratulations. I love that.
So I got all
Such
distracted because now I'm
such
looking at all the
beautiful
different art
offerings.
prints.
I know, they're so beautiful. So chat, please do take time looking through Tiraj's website, shapes of Tiraj, TIRAJ.com. I notice, I feel like a lot of your art is very, like the color feels very saturated,
yes.
which I personally really like. When I moved into my house, all the walls are gray, the floor is gray. It's so boring. My daughter yesterday was like, I want to paint the walls of my bedroom. It's depressing here. And I'm like, you're not wrong. It's very depressing.
Oh,
So I love how like rich and full of vitality your art feels. There's a lot of energy and liveliness within it. Even if it's dealing with serious subject matter. Just your use of color is very strong and brilliant and beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us and the world. It's nice.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm still distracted by looking at all the arts.
I know you're
Okay, I'm gonna tab over and I'll look at the rest.
So good. So good.
Oh no, I really like it. It's like, again, this is a very cliched expression. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like, and I do like this. So we do have a couple concluding questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests. First of all, is there anything that we missed about mental health care and self-expression that you'd like to make sure you say?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. So this question is my favorite one, just because in our current climates, often trans stories are framed in terms of, pain and loss and suffering. But I think it's far more important to share our joy. So can
Yeah.
you share an experience that you've had with gender euphoria?
Oh my gosh, yes. I feel like every time I get a nice fade haircut, I feel very gender euphoric. Tattoos make me feel very euphoric and feel very like just full in my body. I got top surgery last year. My mom drove down to Florida and actually surprised me with this cute big like certificate frame. And she made it herself, printed it out and everything. And it's called the Reborn Certificate. And the date and time was like the day and time of my surgery, almost like this was before I got my birth certificate done. So, and she came with like nice little gifts that were very like affirming and stuff. And for a while, she was struggling with like the name change and everything, even though she's been like supportive and everything. And so that was like a really beautiful moment that I cherish, and it's kind of sitting in my room. But yeah,
That's wonderful.
yeah.
Now, what would you like to make sure that folks know about your perspective on gender and non-binary, trans, and or gender diverse issues?
Um, that all of these things are a spectrum, it's fluid. So definitely be compassionate with yourself while you figure things out, and the right people are going to allow you to reintroduce yourself to them as many times as you need to, and you're valid and you're worthy and you're enough and you have always been enough. Like that is nothing that's new. It's just us tapping in and remembering that. Um, and it is okay to still be figuring out, to come out 100 different times in all different ways. And that's what happens when you learn new information. You integrate it and you adapt accordingly. And so you're on the right track. So definitely don't gaslight yourself just because new information is coming up and you're second guessing something. That is okay. Like you're still on the right path. Like it's very
Well, friends, Tiraj is an artist, activist, life coach, and storyteller. His art is inspired by his experiences as a licensed social worker / therapist and the desire to return to the parts he was made of while encouraging others to live authentically through creative expression. You can check out https://bio.site/Tiraj, TIRAJ, or shapesoftiraj.com for more information. You can also catch Tiraj on Instagram. Tiraj means golden is the Instagram handle. Now we're going to let Tiraj do this week's cloud or query that you, our audience, can answer on our social media platforms.
Yeah, so I would love to know, what should mental health professionals do to provide more competent care to trans and gender nonconforming folk? And also, what inspires you when expressing yourself, including but not limited to gender expression?
Thank you so much for your queries, everyone. We look forward to reading your answers. Next Monday, Genderful is taking a break because it's the end of the month, and we like to take one of our Mondays off per month so the editors get a chance to catch up and everyone can collectively have good self-care and just downtime to do the other tasks that we need to do. But the week after that, our guest will be Marisabel Lopez, she, her pronouns, and we are discussing queer music. Let's see, for community updates, in March, on the 14th of March, we have Contributor Appreciation Day. We're doing a Pi Day celebration with Hexagonal and some other friends. It is also going to be our VTuber off, which was a mutual aid promise from Lexington's mutual aid event, which I don't even remember how long ago that was. It might have been a year ago. It took us some time to figure out what is a VTuber off. We are still deciding what that means, but there will be, everyone will be having VTubers, and I will let you know that I will be debuting a new VTuber that I commissioned from Mrs. Gendered in It is a full body sized VTuber. So you've never seen me have a VTuber reactive image that's full body. It's just been a bust. So you get an entire being. And I'm very excited to unleash the greatness
full
upon you
Meowster.
all. The full Meowster. Exactly.
That's
Also, at the
exciting.
end of March, please do save the date for our Trans Day Visibility Mutual Aid event. It'll be March 28th through 31st. So see folks at that event, I hope. For now, Genderful. Oh yeah, thank you for that reminder, Mirami. So there is one more community update. Disability Day of Mourning is March 1st every year. And this year, the GenderMeowster team, and therefore also in some ways Gender Federation, are partnering with the Pittsburgh, what is the full phrase? Let me make sure I get it right. The Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy for a Disability Day of Mourning multi-stream. So it'll be here on Twitch. It will also be on their Facebook page and their YouTube channel. So that is a fun and exciting thing that we are offering to everyone. I guess it's not fun since it is a death holiday, but it's exciting because it's a collaboration we've not done before. And I've done one Disability Day of Mourning stream before, and it was really hard to organize the whole thing by myself. We had some readers, but it was, I need to give it the same amount of time and attention as Trans Day of Remembrance. And one big mourning ritual per year is enough for me to organize. So I'm so grateful that the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy is already doing this work. And they were just like, hey, we need tech support. And I was like, tech support, you say? I don't know some people. So the event itself will have not only live captioning done by an actual person who's typing the captions to make sure it's accurate. We also are going to actually have ASL. So if you would like to see sign language as part of the Disability Day of Mourning event, to the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy's knowledge, they are the only group doing a Disability Day of Mourning event that includes ASL. The only one. So it's a little bit ahead of its time. It's a little bit bleeding edge technology and inclusion for this disabled grief event. So they are doing all kinds of media blasts. They actually are doing a press release today about it, which I've never done a press release. And I'm like, oh, I need to learn how to do that. So please do come to our inaugural collaboration with the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy to check out the Disability Day of Mourning event. It will be on March 1st, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right here on Twitch and also on their YouTube and Facebook channels. Thank you so much again for that reminder, Mirami. So friends, we would like to thank all of our supporters on Patreon that support this show: Miranda Catita, Holly Blash, Winter Vespers, Loch Ness Gamer, Justin Baker Rojas, Yaicio, Ray of Swords, Mirami, The Hessian, and Trans Capybara. Enjoy the outro. Genderful would like to thank our guest for being on this podcast. If you'd like to catch us live, join us on Mondays on twitch.tv/GenderMeowster. Show notes will appear in the edited versions of the show on Fridays on both YouTube and podcasting platforms.
If you have a question you'd like the host to answer or are gender diverse and would like to request an interview, please send an email to genderfulpodcast@gmail.com or sign up via the website at genderfulpodcast.com.
As a gender diverse community, the Clouder wants to assure our listeners that we're prepared to moderate our spaces. We will get positive and negative feedback on these shows and topics, and we have a moderation team on our channels, socials, and Discord server ready to deal with this.
Please join our Discord server at discord.gg/Meowster to meet the community and get a regular digest of solidarity resources. You can also support us with subscriptions on Patreon, following and reviewing us on your favorite podcasting platform, or engaging with our posts and content on social media at GenderfulPod and at GenderMeowster.
You can take a few minutes to rate the show. We will post any 5-star reviews on our socials, so get creative. Mention a special interest of your own, a project you're working on, or even say hi to your comfort person in your review. What power!
This show is made possible by volunteers, tips, and subscriptions. Shout out to the folks helping us coordinate guests, edit the podcast, moderate the live chat, and post on our socials.
Here's our artist credit. Genderful is hosted by Miranda and GenderMeowster. Genderful's pre-show is wrangled by JuiceTex. Genderful's live stream is produced by Mirami. Genderful is edited and mixed by Transgriffin and FreeRangeMegs. Genderful's promos and thumbnail graphic are designed by Transgriffin. Genderful's social media is managed by Kainsey. Genderful's theme song is called Hope by FreeRangeMegs, also known as Soma. The current GenderMeowster logo was designed by Siptopia. Genderful is the intellectual property of GenderMeowster. All rights reserved. Trans rights are human rights. That's right.